27 years of marriage, and the thing that breaks you isn't the funeral. It's the Wednesday morning after, when you set two mugs on the counter out of habit and then stand there holding one of them with nowhere for the other to go. My name is Daniel Reyes. I restore rare books for a living out of a narrow storefront on Northwest 23rd in Portland, Oregon, called Reyes Bindery. Same workbench, same green banker's lamp, same smell of leather paste, and old paper for 26 years. It is a modest life, and I have always been satisfied with it the way people are satisfied with things that are genuinely theirs. Miriam was not a modest life. Miriam was the most interesting person I ever met, and I met her at an estate sale in 1998, arguing with the appraiser over the provenance of a hand-colored atlas with the specific cheerful intensity of a woman who intended to win and knew it before she opened her mouth. I introduced myself at the exact moment the appraiser started backing down, because I have always had good timing, and she looked at me and said, "Are you here to disagree with me too?" I said, "Only if you're wrong, and you're not." She laughed. That was the beginning. We were different people, and I mean that in the way that becomes truer with time, not less. The kind of different that's complementary rather than competing, where each person fits neatly into the shape the other doesn't quite fill. Miriam was entrepreneurial in a way I have never been. She had ventures, consulting work she called it in the early years, and later just projects, which is the word people use for things they don't want to explain at dinner. She traveled often. She kept her professional life in a separate room from our domestic one, with the tidy efficiency of someone who decided integration was overrated. I respected that. I respected her. I didn't ask questions she didn't offer to answer, which I would come to understand, in the week after her death, was both the right choice and the most expensive one I ever made. For most of our marriage, that arrangement simply looked like ordinary life with an ordinary amount of mystery in it. I taught myself not to notice the parts that didn't quite add up. The call she took on the back porch with the door closed, the credit card statement that arrived at a separate address I never asked about, the particular way she goes still for half a second before answering a question about her week. I told myself every marriage has rooms the other person doesn't enter. I still believe that. I just hadn't understood, until that October, how large one of our rooms actually was. Tuesday, October 3rd, 3:52 in the afternoon. The call came to the shop's landline, the one on the wall by the register that almost nobody uses anymore, which is why it startled me badly enough to knock a stack of unbound signatures onto the floor. Portland Police, an officer named Delgado. A collision on Highway 26 westbound, near the Sylvan exit. A gray Audi wagon. Miriam's plates. His voice was professional, and kind in the specific way people are professional and kind when they're delivering something irreversible and already know it. I sat down on my stool. "Mr. Reyes, are you still there?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here. I'm sorry to tell you the driver, we believe your wife, was pronounced at the scene." Paramedics responded within 6 minutes, but the impact was because yes was the only word I had left. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I remember standing in the middle of the shop with the client's half-finished ledger still open on the bench, the binding thread still threaded through the needle, and thinking, with a strange clinical detachment that I now recognize as the mind's first defense, that I needed to finish the stitch before the thread dried out. I finished the stitch. I don't know how long that took. Then I locked the front door, flipped the sign, and stood on the sidewalk in the October light, not knowing what to do with my hands. I called Walt Osei from the sidewalk outside the shop. Walt's been my closest friend since we restored a church hymnal together in 2001, and he has the specific quality of a man who can be reached at any hour and will always pick up. First ring. "Danny, what's wrong?" "Miriam," I said. "There was an accident." A pause. "How bad?" Walt was at the shop in 11 minutes. I know because I counted them standing on the sidewalk, counting being what I do with my mind when I need something to do with it that isn't the thing it's actually trying to do. The week that followed was the specific blur grief produces in its immediate aftermath. Not a fog exactly, more a series of very clear individual moments with all the connective tissue removed. You remember the casseroles stacking up on the porch and the sound of Priya crying in the bathroom and the exact weight of the pen when you signed funeral paperwork. But the hours between those moments have been taken somewhere you don't have access to. Theo flew in from Seattle. Priya drove up from Eugene. Both of them by Wednesday evening. and the three of us moved through the house on Northeast Fremont Street in the private orbit of people sharing the same grief, but experiencing it separately, touching base, checking in, drifting apart, coming back together. The funeral was Saturday, October 7th. Miriam had more friends than I knew about in some cases, a sentence I'd come to understand very differently in the weeks ahead. Several of them I didn't recognize at all, well-dressed people who kept a polite distance during the reception afterward, offering condolences in the careful, practiced way of people who'd known her in a context they weren't going to explain to a grieving widower at a reception. I noticed it then and set it aside, filed under things grief makes you too tired to interrogate. The service was full, the eulogies warm. I spoke last and said the things that were true, that she was brilliant, that she was funny in the way that catches you off guard, that she'd argued an appraiser in a submission the night I met her and won, and that 27 years later, I still wasn't sure I'd ever caught up to her. People laughed. Miriam would have liked that. Monday, October 9th, 9:20 in the morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. One cup. I'd started making one deliberately, with the specific intentionality of a man retraining his own habits, when the doorbell rang. The man on the porch was somewhere past 60, gray suit, a leather portfolio under one arm, the kind of presentation that announces official business without specifying what kind. He introduced himself as Gerald Fitch, a notary and estate administrator. Mr. Reyes, I apologize for calling without more notice. I've been trying to reach you, but given the circumstances, I understand if messages haven't been a priority. They haven't, I said. Come in. He sat across from me and opened his portfolio with the practiced efficiency of a man who does this often. He produced a folder, a deed, a key, and a document bearing a notary's seal. Your wife designated me to administer a specific asset transfer, Gerald said. She executed this 14 months ago, with instructions to deliver it to you personally within 10 days of her death. The transfer is automatic. No probate required. The asset is titled directly to you. I looked at the key. A matte black card, a small silver for B stamped along the edge. What asset? I asked. Gerald slid the deed across the table. The Ellery Lofts, 1420 Northwest Flanders, Portland. Unit 4B. A converted warehouse loft, he said. 2,900 square feet, top floor. Your wife purchased it under an LLC 7 years ago. 14 months ago, she transferred sole ownership to you personally, with instructions for this delivery. I looked at my name printed in the clean type of an official document, listed as the owner of something I'd never once heard mentioned. She never told me about this. Gerald's expression stayed careful. I'm not in a position to speak to what Mrs. Reyes chose to share. I can tell you she was clear and deliberate in the documentation. She wanted you to have it. Why didn't she tell me while she was alive? He paused, the kind of pause with an answer inside it he was choosing not to give. Mr. Reyes, I only administer the documents. The contents of the unit, and any context around them, aren't something I have information about. He left 15 minutes later. I sat with the key card in front of me and my 1 cup of coffee going cold. Miriam, I thought. What is this? Here's what I knew about Miriam's business trips, which is to say almost nothing, and by agreement. About 12 years into the marriage, when the project had grown substantial enough that she was traveling 4 or 5 times a year, Miriam sat me down and said, with the direct clarity that was one of her defining qualities, Daniel, my work has parts one can't fully discuss. I'm not going to ask you to be fine with that. I'm going to ask you to trust me, and in exchange I'll tell you we're financially secure, I'm doing nothing illegal, and everything I'm building is for us. I'd asked one question. Are you in any danger? She'd said no, and I believed her the way you believe someone after 12 years of evidence. Not blindly, but on the record of who she'd shown herself to be. I never asked again, in 15 more years, and now, sitting at my own kitchen table with a key card to a loft I didn't know I owned, I was beginning to understand that the trust had been warranted, but the not asking had left me standing at the edge of something very large. I told Walt that evening at his place on Alberta Street, a beer I wasn't drinking in front of me, describing Gerald Fitch and the deed and the key card. Walt listened without interrupting. He's good at that. When I finished, he looked at the card on his coffee table. You haven't gone yet. No. It's been 3 days since the funeral. I'm not ready. What are you thinking? That she had a reason for everything she did. She always did. I picked up the beer, set it back down. I need to understand what I'm walking into before I walk into it. You gonna sell it? Probably. We don't need a loft. I bind old books for a living, Walt. You're also apparently a loft owner now. He looked at me. What did she tell you when you asked about the trips? That we were financially safe, nothing illegal, and she was building something for us. I looked at the coffee table. She wasn't wrong on any count, apparently. Walt was quiet a moment. You gonna call Helena Cho? Helena Cho, my attorney, real estate and estate law, an office in the Pearl, had handled the Fremont Street house closing and our basic estate paperwork. Sharp, direct, the kind of lawyer who tells you what you need to hear without softening it past usefulness. Tomorrow morning, I said. Good, Walt said. Whatever's in that loft. She wanted you to have it. She planned it out, legal and documented, and made sure it reached you. He paused. Whatever it is, she thought you could handle it. I drove home, made 1 cup of tea, sat in the kitchen, looked at the key card. Miriam, I thought again. What did you build? Helena's office was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse on Northwest 13th, overlooking the streetcar tracks. She had the deed and LLC documents in front of her when I arrived Tuesday morning, having reviewed them overnight. The transfer's clean, she said. The LLC was properly structured. The transfer to you personally is valid. No liens, no disputes, nothing complicated in the title chain. It's operated for 7 years, paid its taxes and assessments on time every quarter, and holds no debt. Purchased outright. How much? I asked. She checked the document. Purchase price 7 years ago, $900,000. Current estimated value based on comparables in the building, $1.8 to $2 million. I looked out at the streetcar tracks. What does the LLC list as its business purpose? Consulting and advisory services. She set the page down. Daniel, I have to ask, you didn't know about the property? No. Or the LLC? No. She was quiet a moment. I want you to consider a conversation with the LLC's registered agent before you decide anything. There may be context. Who's the agent? She turned a page. A woman named Renata Voss, listed as a business associate of Miriam's LLC. I'd never heard the name in 27 years. I'm going to see the loft first, I said. Of course. Helena looked at me with the specific directness of someone with more to say. Whatever you find in there, call me before you decide anything. Anything at all. You know something. I know that Miriam Reyes was a careful woman who structured this transfer with considerable deliberateness. Careful people don't leave things in a loft they don't intend for you to find. She handed back the key card. Go see where she left you. The drive from the Pearl to the Ellery Lofts takes 5 minutes on a good Portland morning. I know because I drove it twice, the first time on autopilot, circling back to park properly after apparently pulling into a loading zone without noticing. That's what happens to your situational awareness when your brain is running a separate, much larger process. The building is glass and reclaimed brick on Flanders, a former textile warehouse converted during the Pearl District boom of the early 2010s. 6 stories, a doorman, a lobby that isn't ostentatious but clearly isn't trying to be modest either. I had never once been inside it. Tuesday, October 10th, 11:10 in the morning. Priya Danforth, the building manager, met me in the lobby. Mid-40s, professional, the efficient warmth of someone who reads situations quickly. She'd clearly been briefed. Mr. Reyes, I'm very sorry for your loss. We were all fond of Mrs. Reyes here. I stopped. She was here often? Her expression calibrated carefully, not evasive, just deciding how much belonged to her to say. A regular presence. We respect our residents' privacy, as with everyone. A pause. The unit's on 6. I can take you up, or you can go on your own. On my own, I said. The elevator to 6 was its own 30 seconds of compression, the specific rising pressure of a man ascending toward something he doesn't understand yet, in a building he didn't know he owned, toward a space his wife had used in silence for 7 years. There were 2 units on the top floor, 4A and 4B. The building's old numbering never quite matched the new floors, something I only registered as strange much later. A short hallway, a window at the end looking out over the West Hills, close enough at this hour that the light coming off them was almost the color of the Atlas Miriam had argued over the night we met. I stood at the door with the key card in my hand. She wanted you to have this, Walt had said. Whatever it is, She thought you could handle it. I put the card to the reader. The light went green. I pushed the door open. The loft registered in fragments, the way a space does when it's much larger than anything in your own life. Exposed brick, tall windows, a gray sectional facing the West Hills, a kitchen that looked barely used, a wall of bound volumes that, professionally, I noted were beautifully kept, their spines aligned with a precision that could only have come from someone who'd learned to care about that from watching me work for 27 years. There was a second wall given over to framed photographs I didn't expect. Theo's college graduation, Priya's wedding, the two of us on the Oregon coast the summer we turned 50, all of it hung with the same care as the books, as though this room, whatever else it was, had also quietly been a shrine to the life, she kept telling me, was the only one that mattered. And a woman standing near the window with a folder held against her chest, the posture of someone waiting for a thing they weren't entirely sure would happen, and had now happened. She stood, slowly, with the deliberateness of someone giving a moment its proper weight. "Mr. Reyes," she said. "I'm Renata Voss." The next few seconds were a specific kind of stillness, my brain processing several things at once, none of them finished. The woman working in Miriam's loft, the name from the LLC filing, the calm, weighted quality of her presence. Not hiding, not startled, simply there. "How'd you get in?" I asked, my voice calm. I teach apprentices who try to get away with things at the bench. I know how to keep my voice level while my interior does something else entirely. "Miriam gave me a key," Renata said. "I've had one for 7 years. I wanted to collect some documents before the unit transferred, and I wasn't sure when you'd." She paused. "I should have called first. I'm sorry. I genuinely am." "Who are you?" She held the folder in both hands, the posture of someone who'd prepared for this conversation and intended to have it correctly. "I was Miriam's business partner, her primary one, for the last 9 years. Consulting work, actual consulting, reputation and crisis strategy for corporations. The kind of work companies pay significant fees for and don't advertise because the situations are sensitive." She looked at me steadily. "Your wife was extraordinary at it. The best strategic mind I've ever worked alongside." I looked at her, at the loft, at the hills through the windows. "She used this place for work," I said. "Not question. For meetings, yes. Client confidentiality requires neutral ground. Not the client's offices, not her home. This was her professional space." Renata paused. "Mr. Reyes, I know you didn't know about any of it. Miriam told me you didn't know the specifics. Did she tell you why she didn't tell me?" "She said," Renata chose her words with care, "that you're the most honest and uncomplicated person she'd ever known, and that she meant it as the highest compliment she had. That her work required a certain contained knowledge, need to know, and that you didn't need to know because it wouldn't affect you, and it would only create worry she didn't want to create." I sat down in the chair across from the couch. "Tell me what she actually did." Renata sat back down, opened the folder. "Reputation and transition strategy. When companies are in distress, leadership changes, hostile situations, board disputes, regulatory exposure, they sometimes need someone who can walk in without a visible connection to any faction and read the landscape cleanly. Miriam was that person. She was extraordinary at identifying where the real problems were, versus where everyone assumed they were." She paused. "The clients were significant. Fortune 500 mostly. The fees matched." "How significant?" I asked, because at this point I was a bookbinder standing in a loft, and I needed to understand the dimensions of what I was standing in. Renata turned to a page and slid it across the table. A financial summary, the LLC's revenue over 9 years. I looked at the numbers, then looked again, because the first look produced results my brain wanted verified. "She cleared this," I said, "annually." "In good years," Renata said. "The work paid well because the stakes for clients were extremely high and the discretion was absolute." I set the page down, looked at the hills. 27 years, I thought. She built this for 9 of them. No, more before, in smaller forms. She said we were financially safe. She hadn't been wrong. She'd been describing an understatement so large it had its own zip code. Renata and I talked for nearly 2 hours. She told me about the work in detail, the mechanics, the ethics, the way Miriam had navigated confidentiality with the precision of someone who'd thought through every implication. It was legal, Completely, documentably legal. Miriam was meticulous about that, partly because it's who she was, and partly because she understood that this kind of work only survives as long as its practitioners are unimpeachable. She told me about clients by type, not name, a pharmaceutical board in crisis, a regional bank merger fracturing along loyalty lines, a manufacturing founder being quietly managed out by a board that didn't understand what it was managing out. At one point she mentioned, almost as an aside, that Miriam had once turned down a client worth nearly a year's revenue because the situation would have required misleading a company's own employees, and that she'd never once regretted the loss. That was the whole ethic, really, Renata said. She'd tell people the truth about their organizations, even when it cost her the fee. Especially then. She loved it, Renata said, not wistfully, factually. She used to say it was the opposite of restoring old books. You bind the same kind of thing carefully, over and over, and she solved a new problem with the same toolkit every time. She looked at me directly. She talked about your work often. She was proud of you. She said you were the most grounded person she knew, that you made everything else possible because you were always exactly who you said you were. I sat with that a moment, the compliment and its weight, the fact that Miriam had apparently described my steadiness as the foundation that made her mobility possible. Why this place, specifically? I asked. Why keep a property at all? Several reasons, Renata said, closing the folder. Practicality. A neutral space she controlled completely. Investment. The values climbed substantially. And I think, she paused, I think she liked having something that was entirely hers. A space that belonged to her professional self, separate from the house and the family and the bindery life. She loved that life, Mr. Reyes. She loved you and your children. This wasn't running from something. This was having a full self. I nodded slowly. It was the most Miriam thing I'd ever heard said about her by someone who was essentially a stranger. What happens now to the unit? Renata asked. I don't know yet, I said, standing, walking to the windows, looking out at the hills the way Miriam had for 7 years. I'm not deciding anything yet. Of course. I turned. The folder, what's in it? Documents she wanted you to have. A summary of the LLC's position, account contacts, a letter. She prepared it 14 months ago when she did the transfer. Renata held it out. She said, if something happened to her, and you came to see the loft, to give you this. She said you'd know what to do with it. I took the folder. She'd apparently believed that. He'll know. I didn't know it yet. Hadn't opened the folder, hadn't read the letter, hadn't processed what the financial summary inside was going to show me. I didn't know yet about Desmond Cole, Miriam's silent partner, or what he'd do when he heard the loft had transferred. I didn't know about the insurance review Detective Lena Whitfield was quietly running. I didn't know about the decision Priya was going to force me into before the month was out. I stood in Miriam's loft with Miriam's folder in my hands and Miriam's hills in the window, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that room. Not betrayal, not anger. Awe. 27 years, and she was still surprising me. There's a specific quality to reading words written by someone who's dead. Not like reading their old texts or emails, which were written for the moment. A letter written 14 months before death, with the knowledge it might be the last direct communication between two people, written by someone thinking carefully about what you need to hear. That's a different kind of reading. You feel the intent in every sentence. The weight of someone choosing these particular words, for you, specifically, knowing you might receive them without her. I sat on Miriam's gray sectional with the hills in the window, and Renata gone. She'd left at 1 with a quiet handshake and a promise to be available for questions, and I opened the folder. The letter was on top, Miriam's handwriting, the neat, deliberate cursive of someone who learned to write in the 60s and never let it go casual. Daniel, if you're reading this, then something happened, and I wasn't there to explain it myself. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. The not telling, the locked rooms, the years of trips you accepted on faith because that's who you are, and I never fully deserved it. Let me try to explain what I couldn't while I was alive. The work was real. Everything Renata tells you is accurate. I'm not going to insult you by pretending I kept it from you for your benefit alone. I kept it for mine too. I needed something entirely mine, that I controlled completely, that existed outside the wife and mother geography I loved, but that sometimes felt like the only map available to me. I needed a professional self that was separate, and I was afraid explaining it would make it smaller, or that questions would make it harder to maintain, or that you'd worry in ways I couldn't manage. I told myself it was protection. Some of it was cowardice. I know that. What I want you to understand, none of it was about you. Not 1 minute of it was a rejection of you or our life. That life is the one I chose. You were the one I chose. 27 years later, still you, still the man at the estate sale who told me I wasn't wrong. I never found a better answer than the one you gave that afternoon. I used to sit in this loft some evenings, after a hard call with a client, and think about the fact that you were at home rebinding somebody's grandmother's Bible with the same patience you'd have for a national headline, and it would steady me more than anything Renato or Conrad or anyone in that other life ever could. You never knew you were doing that. I wanted you to know it now. Now, the practical things, because I know that's what you need from me right now. The LLC summary reflects its current state. The accounts are detailed on page 3. Helena Cho has the access information. I gave her a sealed envelope 6 months ago. She knows what to do. The loft is yours to do with as you choose. Sell it, keep it, give it to Theo and Priya. Whatever makes sense for your life now. I chose this building because it appreciates reliably and the light is the best in the city, and because I wanted to give you something that took care of you the way you always took care of everything else, without being asked. There's one more thing I need you to do. Page 4. Please read it carefully. I loved you every day, Daniel. Every complicated, compartmentalized, imperfect day of it. Miriam. I read it twice on that gray couch, the hills in the window. Then I sat with it, not crying. I'd done the acute crying already. In the private way, men who work quietly at a bench have learned to do their grief where nobody's watching. This was past crying. This was processing something very large and very specific and very real. She chose me, I thought, every day, even in the compartments. She chose. Page 4 was 3 short paragraphs. The first identified a man named Desmond Cole, a silent partner in an LLC adjacent to Miriam's consulting work, who'd contributed seed capital to several of her early projects in exchange for a minority interest in future earnings. The arrangement was documented and legal. Desmond had received his agreed returns over 9 years. The second paragraph read, Desmond is going to contact you. He may suggest his returns were insufficient, that he has a claim on the loft or other assets. He does not. Conrad Halsey, and here she listed a Portland attorney I didn't recognize, has the documentation confirming this. Do not engage with Desmond directly. Call Conrad. The third, Desmond was not a good man to do business with, and I regret I didn't see it sooner. He'll try to make you feel like you don't understand the arrangement. You'll understand it completely once you talk to Conrad. Trust yourself. You've always been smarter than you think you are. I set the page down. Smart enough, I thought. She left me a map. I called Helena from the loft at 2:30. She left a letter, I said. A sealed envelope for you. A pause. I have it. I've had it 6 months. She told me not to open it until you call me from a loft. Why the loft, specifically? She said if you called from there, it meant you'd read the whole letter, including page 4. She wanted you to have context before I gave you the envelope's contents. What's in the envelope? The full financial summary of the LLC portfolio and Conrad Halsey's contact information. A pause. Daniel, I need to tell you I reviewed what Miriam sent me. I know the scope of the portfolio. I want you sitting down when you look at page 3. I'm sitting down. Look at the bottom line, the total. I turned to page 3, found the bottom figure, looked at it, looked again. Helena. Yes. Is this what I think it is? Combined LLC value, the investment accounts she held separately, and the loft? Yes. That's what it is. Her voice stayed level, the steadiness of someone who'd prepared for this exact conversation. Your wife was very successful at what she did, Daniel. Very. That number doesn't belong in the life of a bookbinder on Northwest 23rd. It belongs in a different category of life entirely. The category with financial advisors and estate managers and attorneys like Conrad Halsey. She said we were financially safe. She'd used, I was now certain, the most spectacular understatement of our 27-year marriage. What do? I asked. First, call Conrad. Today if you can. Second, don't do or sign anything until you've talked to him. Third, Helena paused. You're going to be okay, Daniel. More than okay. Miriam made sure of that with the same thoroughness she apparently applied to everything else. Desmond Cole called my cell at 4:40 that afternoon. I was still in the Ellery Loft's parking garage, sitting in my car, having spent the last hour in Miriam's loft making a list of everyone I needed to call. I let it go to voicemail. The message was smooth, practiced, warm in the manufactured way of a man who's done this before. Introduced himself, offered condolences, mentioned a long-standing business arrangement with Miriam he'd love to discuss at my earliest convenience, left a callback number. I forwarded it to Helena. Then I called Conrad Halsey. Conrad was somewhere past 60, direct and thorough, a corporate attorney who spent his career in exactly these situations. He'd been briefed by Miriam. Of course he had. She'd briefed everyone before she died. He walked me through the Desmond Cole documentation in 40 minutes, laying out evidence in sequence the way a man does when he's done it before. The investment, the documented returns, 9 years of quarterly distributions, all signed and receipted by Desmond himself. The termination clause Miriam had executed 18 months earlier when she restructured the LLC. Desmond's signature on the termination acknowledgement. At one point Conrad mentioned, almost in passing, that Miriam had insisted on getting Desmond's signature notarized twice, 18 months apart, because she told me, and I remember this specifically, that some men need to sign a thing twice before they stop pretending they never signed it the first time. I laughed, actually laughed, for what felt like the first time in 2 weeks, sitting alone in my car in a parking garage. He has no claim, Conrad said. Not on a loft, not on an LLC, not on anything in your wife's estate. His interest was fully liquidated, and he acknowledged it in writing. Then why is he calling me? Because he's betting you don't know that. Conrad paused. He's done this before, Mr. Reyes. Tested estate beneficiaries during the disoriented period, when they're grieving and unfamiliar with the documents. He assumes you didn't know about your wife's business. He assumes you're vulnerable. What do I do if he calls again? Give him my number. That's all you need to do. I called Desmond back the next day, Wednesday, October 11th. His smooth voice again, condolences, the long-standing arrangement, the suggestion that matters remained unsettled. Desmond, I said, I'm going to give you a phone number. His name is Conrad Halsey. He has every document from the arrangement, including the termination acknowledgement with your signature on it. A pause. His smooth voice did something complicated. I'm not sure what Miriam may have told you. She told me exactly what I needed to know 18 months ago in writing. I read him Conrad's number. Have a good day, Desmond. I hung up. Miriam, I thought you mapped every exit. I called Theo and Priya that evening, Wednesday, both together on a video call. Theo on his Seattle balcony, Priya at her Eugene kitchen table, both with the tired, hollowed look of people 2 weeks into acute grief. I told them about the loft, about Renata Voss, about the LLC, about the letter. I didn't tell them the number on page 3 until I'd told them everything else. The work, the clients, the careful structure, the reasoning Miriam had given in her own words. I wanted them to have the context before the figure, because the context was what made the figure make sense. Theo kept asking practical questions. When, how long, who else knew, the way he processes everything by building a timeline he could stand inside. Priya asked almost nothing, just watched the screen with an expression I recognized from her childhood, the one she used to get right before she solved the puzzle nobody else in the family had managed yet. When I told him the number, Theo went quiet a long moment. Dad, I know. Mom was doing all of that the whole time. 9 years of the current work. Some form of it longer. I looked at my 2 children on the screen, processing their mother in a new dimension. Priya had been quiet most of the call, which with Priya usually means she's doing the most processing. Then, she wanted you to have the loft specifically. Not the LLC, not the accounts. The loft. Yes. Dad. She looked at the screen directly. She wanted you to have something solid, something you could stand inside. She knew you'd need to understand it physically before you'd believe it was real. I looked at my daughter, 31 years old, her mother's perceptiveness with my patience layered over it, a combination that was, as always, devastating in its accuracy. Yeah, I said. I think that's right. Are you going to sell it? I thought about the hills, the 6th floor, the gray couch where I'd read Miriam's letter with the Portland light coming through the west windows. Not yet, I said. Not for a while. Detective Lena Whitfield called in early November, running a routine insurance review, standard procedure for accident claims at Miriam's policy size, with questions about her business activities. The call lasted 18 minutes. I referred her to Conrad Halsey for the business documentation and Helen Cho for the estate. Both attorneys had already been briefed. The review closed within 3 weeks. I went back to the bindery on October 20th, the Monday after 2 weeks away. My workbench, the green lamp, the particular smell of leather paste that hasn't changed in 26 years. My regulars, the university library conservator who brings in the fragile things, the collector who restores his father's field journals 1 volume a year, were unusually gentle with me that first week back. Not performatively so, genuinely thoughtful in the way people sometimes are when they've been reminded that everyone carries a full life outside of what you see of them. I was rebinding a set of early nautical charts that October, a job I've done 100 times with a certain professional detachment. That month I did it differently, with the particular understanding of a man who now knew, in a way he hadn't before, what it takes to build something significant in the spaces between the parts of your life other people can see. Not because you're hiding it from them, because some things are built in the gaps. Walt came for dinner the Friday of my first week back. We ate at the Fremont Street kitchen table, Miriam's good pans, Miriam's choice of chairs, her herb garden visible through the window that needs replacing in the spring, but that she always said she liked because it rattled slightly in the wind, and she found the sound comforting. Walt brought wine. The house was quiet in the particular way it was going to be quiet from now on. How was the first week back? Walt asked. Better than I expected. The Loft. I went back Wednesday, sat there an hour, looked at the hills. Still thinking about selling. I thought about that. About her letter. She wanted to give me something that took care of me the way I always took care of everything else without being asked. So, I'm going to keep it, I said. For now. I picked up my wine. Priya had suggested we use it as a family base in the city, better than hotel rooms when people visit. I paused. Miriam would have liked that. I think the Loft actually being used. Walt nodded. She would. We sat quiet a moment, the Fremont Street house around us. 27 years of it. The specific accumulated life of a place where 2 people had built something together without either fully knowing the dimensions of what the other was building. Danny. Walt looked at me across the table. Are you okay? Honestly, I thought about how to answer that. About the Loft and the letter and the number on page 3. About Desmond Cole hanging up on a Wednesday afternoon with nothing but Conrad's number. About Renata Voss and the gray couch with a folder waiting patiently for the man Miriam had apparently described as the most grounded person she knew. About a woman who'd built something extraordinary in the spaces between her life and documented it meticulously and handed it to me with a key card and a letter. And the specific confidence that I'd know what to do with it. I thought about the wall of photographs in that loft. Our whole life hung there in frames alongside her other one, as if she'd never actually separated the 2 rooms as cleanly as I'd assumed, only kept one door closed while leaving the pictures up on both sides of it. I was a 59-year-old bookbinder on Northwest 23rd. I drove a 12-year-old Volvo wagon. I owned, pending sale or a long-term decision, a loft worth roughly $2 million on the 6th floor of a converted Pearl District warehouse with the best light in the city. I'd been loved for 27 years by someone so thoroughly and so specifically that she'd arranged for a notary to hand me the keys to that love 10 days after she died. Yeah, I said to Walt. I think I am. He raised his glass. I raised mine. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. Outside, the Fremont Street neighborhood was doing its October thing. The leaves turning, the air going crisp, Portland getting ready for the rain the way it always does, without apology or preamble. Miriam had always loved October here. She used to say it was the most honest month. Nothing pretending to be warmer than it was. Nothing trying to be something it wasn't. I thought about that for a long time after Walt left. She had been, in the end, exactly who she said she was. The compartments didn't change that. The work didn't change that. 27 years of the most interesting person I ever met, choosing me every single one of them. That's the whole story. The Loft is still on the 6th floor. The light through those west windows is still extraordinary, and every time I go up there, which is more often than a practical man probably should, I stand at the glass and look at the hills and think, well done, Miriam. You were always better at the details than I was. I kept the wall of photographs exactly as she hung it. Theo's graduation, Priya's wedding, The two of us on the coast the summer we turned 50. Sometimes I bring a book up there to work on in the evenings, some fragile thing that needs a quiet room and good light. And I think about the fact that she built this place to hold a self I never got to meet directly, and somehow still filled it with pictures of the self I knew every single day. Both were real. Both were her. I don't know that I'll ever fully separate the grief from the wonder of that. And lately I've stopped trying to.